Hello everyone, in this video I'm going to be going over exactly what the version 6 is, why it's so rare and kind of sought after amongst collectors, and why it's actually just the worst of the Digimon virtual pets. Like, money value aside, why it's the worst. So let's get into it. So first of all, this is my version 6. I got it a few years ago, maybe just under 10 years ago, just before they really started to jump up in price online. And as you can see, I've actually changed the buttons. Originally it was the purple with yellow buttons, yellow frame, but I changed the buttons up a few years ago. Two reasons for that. One being I found the buttons weren't super responsive, so I swapped it with my DM20, and also the other reason being I wanted a Palmon inspired DM20. So I did this in a video a little bit ago, but these are the V6 buttons and the DM20 frame. This one has its original frame with the pink buttons from the DM20, because you can change buttons between the DM20 and the Digimon originals. So what makes this so sought after? Well, the version 6 was a continuation of the original Digimon Virtual Pet series, but it had the roster from the first of the Digimon Pendulum series. It also had the same background as the version 1 of the Digimon Pendulum, and it continued on with the same mechanics from the original Digimon. So we have baby level to perfect level, so no Mega like that was introduced with the Digimon Pendulum, and no jogressing. So it worked the same way as the Digimon Monster series, not the Digital Monster Pendulum series. And also there was no pendulum mechanic, it was just the brick without any of the shaking and clacking. So these were only released in Southeast Asia and Australia, so they weren't released in Japan, and they were fairly limited in terms of release. They also came out at a time where Digimon wasn't as popular as it was with the previous versions, so most of these sadly did not get sold. So they got thrown out, or people just sort of bought them on clearance and maybe didn't take good care of them, kind of just threw them away, gave them to second-hand stores, etc. So they're a little bit harder to come by than the previous 5 versions. Also, again, they didn't get released in Japan or anywhere else in the world except for Southeast Asia and Australia, and I'm fairly certain while it did get a Southeast Asian release, it was still fairly limited. Australia got, from my understanding, most of them. So if you're looking for one, your best bets are Gumtree Australia, Facebook Marketplace from Australia, or eBay from Australia. You can still get these fairly decent priced locally. I picked up one for 40 Australian dollars just a few months ago. I feel like it was early 2023, so maybe January or February, and I picked it up, but I sent it to a friend of mine, Bobber. So I got them to send me the $40 Australian, and I sent it to them. So I didn't make any money off it, and I didn't keep it for myself. I grabbed it because I wanted it to go to someone who wanted one, and I didn't want it to go to someone who was just going to resell it, basically. So yes, it does take a long time for the egg to hatch on original Digimon, as I'm always remembering when I come to raise an original one. Had to quickly check to see if I actually set the time or not. So that's why it's so rare and costly and sought after, but it really shouldn't be. First of all, the reason I mentioned at the start being the buttons weren't super responsive. My understanding is that this isn't unique to my version 6. The buttons just seem to be not super great on the version 6. And overall, the build quality seems to be a lot lower than previous versions, so versions 1 to 5. That being that these issues seem to be consistent in all of the version 6. For one thing, and I thought this was just me, but it turns out after asking around, it's every version 6, the reset button does not work. It just doesn't. The reset button does not work. The way to reset it is to take out the batteries. You'll also notice that it seems a little bit raised there. My understanding is that a lot of specifically this shell, the translucent shells of the version 6, seem to not quite have enough space for the batteries. And I've seen that fairly consistently on the translucent ones. Not so much the ones with the opaque white, so the white with the blue frame or white with the pink frame or purple frame, but the translucent ones seem to be a little bit tight around the door there and there. See this a little bit up there. So that's kind of annoying. The build quality isn't that good on the version 6. Another thing that while I like the fact that they give you a growth chart, it actually has multiple errors. There are tons of errors in this growth chart. It's kind of I feel like I counted at least 10 last time I checked. I won't go through all of them. My personal favorites are, they're finally hatching. My personal favorites being Monochiromon. So that's the first most glaring issue is the typo, Monochiromon. The fact that that is actually Gotsumon's sprite, I'm fairly certain, which is interesting. And also the main thing being that the arrows don't actually point to correct characters necessarily. There's a lot of mons that don't evolve into other mons. Also, I guess it's to signify that Bubamon evolves to Multimon regardless of care, but it just looks like there's 2 arrows there. But mostly, these arrows don't necessarily make sense. There are Digimon that evolve to Digimon that they don't evolve to. There's also incorrect attacks and incorrect sprites, which, again, it's kind of funny from an official piece of merchandise, but it is kind of cool that they do pack in this fairly cool evolution chart. And I've posted a scan of this on Twitter before just to share it because it's kind of funny just how many errors that there are. So that's one thing. It's cool, but there are so many errors. Fairly certain that only the version 5 and version 6 came with these. The version 5 one I don't have. I'm not sure if it's got the same amount of errors, but it is something that is kind of funny that I noticed. Another thing is that the Digimon that appear on the version 6 aren't that unique compared to the rest of the rosters. A lot of these Digimon have been on previous versions of the version 6, and of course that's because it's inspired from the Digimon Pendulum original, but I really wish they did more unique things with the roster here. Of course we do have Tekamon, who, as far as my understanding, is not available on any other virtual pet, or at least not from around this time, so that's cool that we get a unique Digimon there. And I feel like Shelnumon's also unique, and also obviously Tentomon, but the rest of them, like Kabuterimon was version 2, Monochromon and Kuwagamon were both on the version 4, Tortomon was on the version 3, I'm fairly certain, just going off memory here. So a lot of repeats from previous versions. So that's something that's a little bit of a shame. Maybe you wanted to raise a specific unique Digimon, but a lot of these you can just raise on any of the previous versions of the Digimon original. So that's one thing. And again, just to reiterate, this reset button just does not work, and that is me pushing it. It does not work. And again, I thought that was just me, but I've asked around to other people with version 6s, and they all said the reset button just doesn't work, so you actually have to tab it or take out the batteries if you want to reset it or wait for it to die, and then hatch a new egg. So that is something that is weird. The build quality, not good. The roster, not super unique. The next thing is that the training. Now, this is something that really annoys me. The training, them being Bandai, just got the version 1 training, so the attack up or down training from the version 1, except they fixed it. So on the version 1, you can cancel out, and that is a training. You can fail, that's a complete training, that counts. So you can cancel out, or you can fail the training, and that is considered a successful training. That's the version 1. However, on the version 6, they fixed it by meaning that the only successful training is if you win. And this is a completely chance-based game. There are patterns on the DM Color, because the DM Color version 1 also fixed it. You actually have to have a successful training session to count it. So they fixed it, but they have patterns. So that's a failed training. I did the whole thing, but it's failed. So you can see we've got a sad baby. So you actually have to win. You have to do 3 out of 5 or higher. So 3, 4, or 5 out of 5 to be considered successful. And because it's random and there's no pattern to it like there is on the Digimon Color, you can kind of just be, look, that's a successful one. And yeah, so completely random, no pattern, because they fixed the training, which means that if you want a certain evolution that requires you to have like 30 plus instances of training, you have to do it 30 times successfully, which is a shame. So those are the reasons why the Digimon version 6, despite its dumb price online, is actually the worst Digimon virtual pet. Of course, I love mine. I love that I have one. If you're a collector, you're obviously going to want one in terms of a collection piece, but in terms of the overall enjoyment I get from this versus literally any other Digimon virtual pet, is kind of low. Like, I don't actually run this. I ran it enough times to get every single Digimon once, and I was like, yep, cool, 100%. And ever since then, it sits on my shelf, and I'm happy to have it. I'm not gonna get rid of it. I really like it. I like having it, but it's not as fun as the other ones. It's not worth the price. So if you want it just because it has Tentomon on it, for example, get literally any other Digimon virtual pet that has Tentomon. Get the Pendulum version 1. I would recommend the Pendulum version 1 because it is fairly cheap. You can get it fairly cheaply from Japan. Try a proxy service like Buy from Japan, buy from Japan you want when they relist them, that sort of thing. Not sponsored. Those are just some ways to get a Pendulum version 1. I wouldn't necessarily recommend this unless you are a die-hard collector and you really want the version 6. But of course, if you get the version 6, you have to get the 7, 8, 9, and 10, which are pendulum cycles, which are unique. I've gone over them before. They are completely different from this, and I've covered them on many videos, but I do intend on covering them again. So check out my video for exactly what the pendulum cycle is and why it's better and worse than the version 6. But in any case, those are my thoughts on the version 6. Let me know your thoughts, comments, questions, etc., in the comment section below. Like this video for Tekkamon existing. Very happy that Tekkamon exists. And of course, subscribe if you haven't already. And if you have subscribed, tell your friends, tell your neighbours, tell that kid you know from your childhood who used to play Digimon with. And yes, I will see you on the next video. Bye!